Thanks for joining me for this edition of the Author's Corner, brought to you by KNEO 91.7 FM, The Word, and I'm Roberta Foster. And today I have the pleasure of talking with Jill Baughan, and she has written the book, No Matter What, 90 Devotions for Experiencing Unexpected Joy in Tough Times. It's published by Our Daily Bread Publishing. She'll tell you more about how to find the book at the end of the program. So let me tell you a little bit about Jill. She is an author, speaker, podcaster, and curator of Joy Shots, who helps people find joy no matter what else is happening in life. But Jill is no stranger to painful times, experiencing the sudden death of her father when she was 10, and multiple surgeries, chronic pain, family crises, and a breast cancer diagnosis as an adult. But because of these challenges, she's discovered ways to find joy in the middle of tough times and has thus been motivated to do a podcast, Find Joy No Matter What, as well as put it in print with this book, No Matter What, 90 Devotions for Experiencing Unexpected Joy in Tough Times. So, Jill, thank you so much for being with us on Author's Corner.
I'm so glad to be here, Roberta. Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. So, define to us the difference between joy and happiness, so we know what it is that we're going to be studying.
Sure. Happiness generally refers to circumstantial, elation. Something happens and it makes you happy. But I define joy as deep delight that feeds your soul so that you can possibly conceive of finding joy alongside hard times. When you think about it as deep delight that feeds your soul, that you can experience some deep delight even in your hardship. So, big difference.
Absolutely. Well, joy is obviously a focus of your life. You've got a book. You've got a podcast. How did that come to be such a focus?
Well, it started when I was very young. I tell people that I found out on the Tilt-A-Whirl, if you remember that ride. It still exists. It goes round and round on a platform that also goes around and around. I found out as a kid at a street fair in my hometown in Indiana that it was indeed possible for a human being to laugh and throw up at the same time.
Oh, no.
And I said, that is where I first found out that you can hold joy and tough times in the same space. But, it came back to me as an adult when I was at a basketball banquet one time, and the Chick-fil-A cow came bopping in as the mascot, and that cow was having so much fun, and I looked at my husband and I said, that looks like fun. I could do that. And he said, well, why don't you do it? And I said, sure. And then I just kind of forgot about it until about 3 months later when we were at a Chick-fil-A. And he said, why don't you go up there and talk to the manager about putting on that cow suit? And so I was busted. I had to do it. So I went up to the counter, asked for the manager, and asked him, I said, what does it take for a person to put on the cow suit and do a few gigs? And he looked at me very quizzically and said, what does it take? A pulse. That's what it takes. That was it. All you had to do was be breathing. No talent, no experience, no nothing. So he gave me an application that was clearly intended for an adolescent looking for a part-time job. And I thought, I am going to have so much fun with this. So I made an appointment with the HR lady that he recommended me to, and I got my college transcripts. I put together a resume and a portfolio to die for. Then I met her. We met at the mall, but I got dressed to the nines, just as professional and fancy. And she was a lot younger than me, and I have always said I think she was taking it way too seriously. But anyway, very nice. And we had our interview, and at the end, she stood up and stuck out her hand and said, I am pleased to offer you the position of area market cow for Chick-fil-A. And I thought, I have never had such a great job interview in my life. So over the next year, I did it maybe 5 or 6 times, had different events to go to. But a year later, I was the cow at that same banquet, and it came full circle. So it was at a different venue. I was standing. I don't know if you've been in a cow suit before.
No.
But they are very warm.
Yes.
Very, very, very warm. And I was waiting for my turn to go on, and all of a sudden I was experiencing the personal summer that ladies of a certain age are prone to experience, and I could feel it coming up just like a furnace inside of me. And I thought, oh, no, not in this get-up. Please, please, not in this get-up. But it reminded me of some sadness in my life. And that was this, that my husband and I had dealt with infertility most of our married life. And we were able to have a child. We were not led, and she's all grown up with children of her own now. But we were not led. God did not lead us to adopt. He did not lead us. We were poor candidates for many alternate forms of conception. And it was obvious with every personal summer that I experienced that I was getting closer and closer to the end of my reproductive years. And the answer was no to our prayers.
Okay.
And everybody listening knows exactly how it feels when God says no, and it doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't seem fair, and it's so sad. And I had gotten so sad that for a couple years it was starting to get hard to get out of bed, just all kinds of things. And I had always been a deeply joyful person before that previous 2 years. And I didn't know if I was just going through a season of sadness or if I was turning into a sad person. And then, right there in that moment, God gave me a transformative thought, I call it, that it changed the way I thought about joy and sorrow forever. And it led me to do what I do now. And I thought to myself, isn't this the perfect picture of joy and sorrow in the same place? Me having a hot flash in a cow suit. And I said, I love an object lesson. And I thought, this is funny. I'm laughing and crying at the same time.
Yeah.
But it was very, very influential in leading me to talk about joy and sorrow in the same place. Because me in the cow suit saying goodbye to a dream.
Well, we're going to find out more about that in just a moment. I am talking with Jill Baughan regarding her book, No Matter What, 90 Devotions for Experiencing Unexpected Joy in Tough Times. It's published by Our Daily Bread Publishing, and you're listening to Author's Corner, and I'm Roberta Foster. So, Jill, tell us how God helped you to find joy in the midst of a very sad situation.
Well, I learned to practice joy. And the author, Tommy Newberry, talks about joy a lot. And he talks about mental discipline, which sounds horrible. It sounds like what I call low-carb thinking, like no fun. But he means this by that. I'm going to quote him. He says, though God's grace doesn't require mental discipline, living a life of joyful excellence must be preceded by it. So I call that changing the channel. And I say it to myself on the regular. It's a practice of mine, and I think you practice this when I find myself spiraling or going down a negative path. I'll say, all right, Jill, time to change the channel. And it's very helpful. I have other practices, too, like a one-line-a-day journal that my husband and I use every evening before we go to bed. We think, and this journal goes on for 5 years. It's got just a little tiny space. You go through the whole year and then start another year. It's a little book, but we decided we would write down one good thing about the day in that journal. And we are on our 6th year now. So
Wow.
we filled up one book, and there is something so wonderful about going to sleep at night and with the goodness of God on your mind. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of good things. So sometimes it's just about a practice. It's about changing the channel in your mind.
Well, tell us about the writing of your book, No Matter What. There are 90 devotions for experiencing unexpected joy in tough times. And so are these by any chance from some of those one-liners, or how did you come up with the content for your devotions?
These are almost exclusively from the podcast.
Okay.
And people will say, well, how do you get ideas for the podcast? And I tell them I always start with a story. So every entry in this devotional is centered around a story, a true story. A lot of them have humor in them because I've always said I want people to experience joy while they read the book and have hope for joy after they put it down. So there's some very serious things that go on in that book too, but lots of humor.
Well, and I see that you end your stories, each devotion, with a prayer that helps people to focus on what you're trying to teach them through that writing.
Exactly. Just a small prayer. Everything is small. It might take 2 or 3 minutes to read the devotional, but I have found a lot of people like short and simple like that, and they love stories. So. Well, there you have it.
I see that you have it categorized into different parts. And so why don't you tell our listeners what those 4 parts are?
Well, they go through stages of life.
Okay.
And they are my stories there are stories from childhood, from adolescence, and from adulthood, and then from the rest of life. I think I called it the best of life in the book. But I wanted there to be momentum in this book, that it went somewhere, that you could see in someone else's life how joy carries you from childhood all the way to the end. But I also tell people that every one of these stories is your story, too. When we were doing the audio book, which was so fun, the audio engineer, it took us forever because I would read a story, an entry, and then he would stop and he'd say, that reminds me of X. And I said, that is exactly music to my ears because they are everybody's story.
Yeah. As mentioned in your bio, you are an author, and so you have a couple of other books out there. So why don't you tell our listeners what they are and then how they can find No Matter What?
Okay. Years ago, in 1989, I wrote a book about infertility. It was called A Hope Deferred, A Couple's Guide to Coping with Infertility. And those are the days in Christian publishing when talk about infertility was just beginning. And then about, 15 years later, I said, I write a book about every 15, 20 years. It needs time to marinate. Later, I found that there was such a need. So many people did not know how to have fun and play. So I wrote a book called Born to be Wild, Rediscover the Freedom of Fun. And those are essays about, and also stories about having fun. And then, of course, that morphed into a ministry about joy because I realized it wasn't really about fun necessarily, acts of fun. It was about a whole being of joy. Yeah, and you can get my current book just about anywhere books are sold. You can go to Amazon, you can go to Our Daily Bread, Barnes & Noble, Christian book.
Okay.
It is very easy to find.
All righty. So as a reminder, the book is called No Matter What, 90 Devotions for Experiencing Unexpected Joy in Tough Times. It's written by Jill Baughan, spelled Baughan. As mentioned, it's published by Our Daily Bread Publishing, and we certainly appreciate them giving us a copy of the book to talk about today. And Jill, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you, and obviously this book and our talk today being so much fun could certainly lead people to try to find that other book about being fun. And I just have to add one more question. Is the cow story in that book?
It is. It is in both of those books.
Okay.
It's in Born to be Wild, and it's in the devotional in a shorter form, but oh yes, ma'am. That's a classic in my life. So absolutely.
All right. Well, we certainly thank you for being part of Author's Corner today and appreciate your time.
It was my privilege. Thank you so much.
And to our listeners, if you'd like to hear this interview again or share it with another, you can find it on your favorite podcast platform or through kneo.org. So thank you so much for tuning in. This is Roberta Foster on the Author's Corner. Join me again next time.